Hi everyone, welcome to Edu Crafters. I'm your host E, and today I'm super excited to have this wonderful chat with Thomas, who is the founder of EduAide. So I meet Thomas through my Johns Hopkins professor who emphasizes a lot on evidence-driven methods. And I was very lucky that I met Thomas in person at one of the EdTech Summit last year hosted by Johns Hopkins University in DC. And I was able to see the product in person, see through the Premium account, and I was super amazed by all the wonderful functionality of it. But what makes the product EduAide remarkable is not just that it launched pre-GPT time, which is March 2023, but it's also a bootstrapped teacher-owned platform that systematically translates over 1,000 learning sciences research articles into over 100 instructional tools. And unlike its competitors, EduAide is not investor funded, and it maintains complete pedagogical control. And that's super amazing. So today, I'm very lucky to have its co-founder, Thomas, here, and we're gonna share a lot of the stories of its founding development journey, and Thomas can also demo us this tool. I'm just gonna dig deep into all the thinking process because I believe this conversation is gonna be so remarkable because I personally think EduAide is one of the few true AI-driven edtech products that has pedagogy integrated by design. It's not just AI native, I think it's pedagogically native. So Thomas, nice to meet you. And I met you through Hopkins professor who was, who was deeply skeptical about AI in education, ironically. But he was super excited about EduAide. So, that kind of tells me something about your product that was fundamentally different. So since your product was launched before GPT era, that was before generative AI era, what convinced you and your co-founders that generative AI was ready for education when most of the field was still very, skeptical? And why do you want to fund it? And especially, I know you found this product or this platform while you were teaching 7th grade social studies. So you were a teacher, by yourself. You're a teacher turned founder and turned, edtech evangelist. What was your thought about, okay, I want to build a product. I don't want to do this manually. I don't want to use other existing products, things like that.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to this conversation. I should note that I too am quite skeptical of AI in education. I agree with Dr. Devers and Dr. Diamond on those counts. Now, when I launched EduAide with my co-founder Thomas Hummel back in March of 2023, I was not sold that AI was ready for education. It bore out of an experiment, right? I'm not a founder. I'm someone who's deeply interested in education and how people learn and the cognitive processes of learning and the tools that we use to support those processes. And that interest just led me to accidentally founding a company, I suppose. That might be why we have gone bootstrapped and not funded, right? Because in our minds, this has been an experiment that we have been testing and improving on as we've gone down the road. So when we first launched, ChatGPT had just launched, and my co-founder, Thomas Hummel, a 7th grade science teacher, was playing around on the platform, found it to be interesting, right? He could quickly generate a lesson plan or a worksheet or a lab or something like this for his science class, but found that there was still some gaps. The quality wasn't quite there, and the interface that you would use, ChatGPT itself, was not ideal for a teacher to work in. So we approached it with two questions. One, could we make a better user interface for teachers to interact with AI for instructional purposes? And then second, is there anything that we can do to constrain the AI within evidence-based frameworks of instruction, or to increase the likelihood that the AI will respond in a way that mirrors what an evidence-based principle looks like? Because again, AI has no metacognition, no internal dialogue, no knowledge of pedagogy. So what you're really doing is playing a language game to get it in the to essentially put it such that the output will mirror what the best possible version of an instructional material would look like. So what I mean by that is, let's say we're creating something as simple as a short answer worksheet for a math class. Well, what is the purpose of a short answer worksheet in a math class? So before we design anything, we strip away all the technology and ask, what is this tool, what is this thing supposed to do? So for a short answer worksheet, you would want first maybe 6 questions that are minimally differentiated, which means essentially it's the same frame, right? Maybe you're factoring polynomials or something like this. It would start with the same few words, and then only the problem itself would change. So you reduce the cognitive load. Students aren't reading 6 differently worded questions. The question should be worded exactly the same. And then for the second step, maybe questions 7 through 10, now you introduce a different type of wording that you build on top of that. So then you try to embed that into the output. You want minimally differentiated 7 retrieval questions that follow into a minimally differentiated group of 3 that build in complexity. And then from there, you just keep iterating. You write some sort of prompt that does that. Then maybe you pull up some different instructional research studies about minimally differentiated short answer worksheets. You get a sense of, what can we say for certain as a bare foundational level of truth of like, what is the best possible version of this? And then again, you just keep trying to get closer and closer. And then you can start grading it against some of the criteria that the papers will raise. Maybe, again, it should be minimally differentiated. It should be retrieval focused. It shouldn't just be mere comprehension. And then you begin to see over the course of generations whether or not you're getting close to that. And then once you do get close to it, you can fine tune your system against all of those rows of inputs and outputs and grading.
That's
and that
great.
Kind of gives you the overview of what EduAide is in a nutshell. It's that applied to 110 different resources with the knowledge graph behind it. And then since we've last talked, we've partnered with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to do evaluators and use their knowledge graph as well. So
that's amazing.
That's the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super amazed by the progress. And then I think just like 3 minutes in, you already mentioned 3 or 4 different terms of learning sciences. I'm happy that finally we're speaking we're like speaking the same language that we always want to speak. It's always amazed me that even for some in probably everyday language, right? We call it, oh, there's some quizzes, let's do it. Let's do your homework. But beneath those quote unquote homework or quizzes, that you think, oh, every day is the same. It's so boring. It just are repetitions. It's just like, behaviorism based, like dumping it's not even knowledge, like dumping the exercise into students' mind. But if you really think deep about it, if you become very critical about it, it's all connected with different pieces of learning science. Like you mentioned, for example, cognitive overload, right? How do you don't make the students think too much of the things that it's not directly beneficial related to their contents? You also mentioned like retrieval practices that many people were like, especially, I think part of the context of this podcast is those like Asian listeners, like Chinese listeners in particular. And I think we grew up in a very struggling manner in which, because there's so many populations, a lot of the education was very behavior driven. Yes, a lot of repetitions. People are sick of it. And now with AI, we're thinking about, oh, it's finally a time for cognitivism, for constructivism. Let's give meaning. Let's make meaning out of it. So when you have like PBL, you have class discussions. But now people are, especially the teachers, like, what are actually PBL? Like, and also you mentioned like other words, for example, did I mention like active retrieval, active recall, things like that? So I think that bring up like one thing that I think you will be the best person to explain exactly what is evidence-based teaching or research. Like why it is so important. It's I will let you talk. Yeah.
Yeah, that term gets bandied around a bunch. What we really mean when we say evidence-based at EduAide is that underneath each of the tools or prompts, right? If it's a Socratic seminar or a warm-up activity for class or a marking the text activity, whatever it is, whatever activity you are doing in class has an underlying method that makes it up, right? It's not the act itself, but underneath the act, there's a method to it. When you engage students in marking the text, for example, you are engaging them in practice and annotating a text to identify main ideas, key details, evidence, or prep for writing or something like this, right? There's a method underneath that. It's not just a text, right? We're not asking the AI to generate an informative text with a few questions. You have a very particular practice in mind. So when we say evidence-based, what we mean is, are the methods that you are choosing more likely to create conditions in which students will learn, or less likely to create conditions in which students will learn? And there are certain principles about which you can wield and hopefully increase the likelihood that students will learn in your classroom. Now, I should say this doesn't mean that learning is guaranteed. It doesn't mean if you engage students in retrieval practice spaced over time with old and new content interleaved together, with frequent practice testing and prior knowledge checks to ensure that students can access the to-be-learned material, and then not say massing all of your practice in one session. Just because you do all of these things, it still does not guarantee that learning will take place. What you're really doing in teaching is it's just kind of a statistical game. You're trying to create the conditions in which learning is most likely to occur. Now, this means you need an orderly learning environment. So there's a whole bunch of basic things the teacher needs to master. Classroom management is a prerequisite. If you can't not manage your classroom, you will not be able to engage student attention on the material that is to be learned. And if you cannot engage student attention, then they will not be able to encode that information, consolidate, and then later retrieve that information through practice. So when I say evidence-based frameworks of instruction, I don't mean like Gagne's 9 events of instruction or adhering to Bloom's taxonomy or anything like this. What I really mean is just a very basic view that there are certain facts about how the brain encodes, consolidates, and retrieves information, and that these facts about the brain limit the kinds of instructional interventions, techniques, and methods that may or may not be effective in class. And it's from that understanding that you just kind of explore. Not every method will always be successful in each class. That's why educational research is so difficult. It's hard to create a perfectly controlled study to understand what works best. We have a lot of approximations. We have some replication on certain studies to see different learning techniques that are more effective than others. But in general, evidence-based means there is a body of research that shows that this technique, under certain conditions, can create conditions in which learning may take place. But there are boundary conditions for every single one of those methods, beyond which it may no longer be effective. For example, explicit instruction. Explicit instruction is most effective for novice learners. Unguided discovery is not an effective method for novice learners. But unguided discovery may be useful for someone who's approaching mastery, who wants to kind of stretch out their skills, so to speak, and test themselves, right? As you become more, I don't want to say more expert, more adept with the concept or material, then the teacher can begin to take their hands off. But again, it's all about when you're doing the technique, where the learner is in regard to the content that you're teaching. So what prior knowledge do they have? And that prior knowledge isn't just declarative knowledge, it's also procedural knowledge. Can they analyze a source? Can they read at this level? Can they write a coherent essay with a thesis statement that develops ideas logically with reasoning? So there's a lot of constraints to what we say as evidence-based instruction. And I feel that too many educators are sold that a certain method or technique will work better all of the time. And that's how you end up with teachers taking a very kind of checklist way of teaching. Oh, I must first check for prior knowledge, or I must first engage the students, then check for prior knowledge, then move into direct instruction, then move into a practice assignment, then move into feedback, then another practice. It's like if you make everything kind of robotic, unthinking, it will no longer be effective. What an evidence-based framework of instruction for a teacher means is that you have a lot of different tools that can work in different circumstances, and you have the knowledge of when to apply them. So that goes back to TPAC, if you've ever heard of that. It's technological pedagogical content knowledge. And having evidence-based instructional methods just means that you have a deep pedagogical knowledge of, again, controlled studies, replicated research, replicated methods that have been shown to be effective in certain conditions.
Yeah, thank you for explaining this. I think this is really eye-opening. Maybe it's like ear-opening as well. We're recording a podcast for many of the audiences here. One thing I really I feel strongly about when you were talking, and again, it's always like make me so feeling like refreshed and also excited when people are talking about pedagogy with AI technology, because I think that's where the true value will really explode. Not just like it's not generation. It's not just reasoning. Because teacher, yeah, more or less, teacher is a translator because the teacher needs to translate the content information, but like following the TPACK framework. But the translation itself needs to be weaved with pedagogy. It's not just like word by word. And now with AI, you have to think about tool creation, how to like you might want to define the tool, you might want to pick a tool, like you said, when, where, to whom, to do that. And summing up this together, what I feel like one word just emerged to my mind is intention. Right. So, like you said, evidence-based is not like this is the best, this is the only way we need to go. And this entire pedagogical decisioning is very dynamic. And it's dynamically, it's like a water, like a river, as you are flowing. The granularity of the decision making is different and in different context. That's why teaching is so hard, but it's also so fascinating. So talking about intention, I think definitely one is like a teacher or student, both of them need to have awareness, a self-awareness or environmental awareness, which we usually would just call presence. But at the same time, I think, by the way you describe your learning, your own experiences, and by the way you describe and how you kind of like at least semantically and putting all linguistically this together, I also feel when we talk about content knowledge, it's not just pedagogy itself, but also having that exposure and training to be not just a teacher, but also education researcher. So I think from your personal experience, you were first a teacher and then you had this at least master degree of training at Johns Hopkins School of Education. So you are really waving this research mindset with a practitioner's mindset. And again, like intention is probably something like synergy created and merged between. So, there's something I think that definitely also manifested in how you co-founded EduAide, because I personally word it as learning science translation engine, but I would just put a quote on the translation. Like again, it's not translate from English to Chinese or French to Japanese.
Translate theory into practice.
Yes, yeah. So I have so many questions, but so I will roll them out one by one.
Okay.
So first of all, EduAide is grounded in a knowledge graph that waved over a thousand evidence-based research articles. And again, it's not marketing. It's not for promotion. It's really a systematic approach. So do you mind walking me through how you and your team build this knowledge graph? For example, how do you find those papers? How do you select those papers? And maybe even, taking a step back, why do you want to start with research papers? There are books, like some like learning sciences books. There could be some textbooks like we are reading at the school. But what makes you feel like, oh, I want to gather over 1,000 research papers? I mean, maybe you start with like 100, 300 or something. How do you feel, and what kind of like make you think, oh, I want to turn very, very hands-on research into this practice and operationalize it? I think that was the word I want to use.
Yeah, the first piece of that is, as an educator, I saw that what I was learning for my graduate degree about effective methods of instruction and what was actually going on in classrooms around me were not congruent. There were gaps between what we know to work and what actually, again, happens in the classroom. So our goal was to bridge that gap, to bring academic ideas to solve real-world instructional challenges that teachers face. But the problem with that is, again, the quality of the average instructional research paper is not that high. No one single study is that good. It might be a controversial opinion, but that's kind of why you go about collecting so many. You want a representative sample of the research in education because the quality of educational research should be vastly improved. As a discipline, this should be our primary focus. Our methods of actually understanding which instructional practices work and which ones don't really aren't there. Controlled studies in the classroom are really difficult to pull off, so I understand a part of that constraint. So that's the first piece. You want to bridge the gap. Now, the actual process itself. So again, the papers have to go through selection criteria. We can get into that as well. I can actually pull the selection criteria up so I'm not making things up as I go along. And then from there, we will essentially take that paper, tag it. So we have a series of tagging mechanisms. We understand which part of our application it would relate to. Is this paper talking about direct instruction? Well, then this would go to the direct instruction portion of the application and all of the prompts related to it. Is this paper about, say, student-centered instruction, collaborative-based instruction? Then we tag it for that. Assessments, we tag it for that. Practice, we'll tag it to that, etc. From there, we try to understand, well, what are the instructional implications of this paper? Like, what is the paper really getting at? Is it talking about how to structure an activity? Is it talking about how to best approach implementing that technique? Is it just talking about the technique in general? Who is it actually implemented for? Was it a study of undergraduate students? Was it a study of K to 12? Is it a controlled laboratory study, or was it done in the wild, so to speak, in classrooms? Okay, so the first thing is that the methodology, search procedure, our inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, how we code the studies, it all branches off of my graduate work at Hopkins. I was writing a paper on evaluating the quality of open educational resource studies. So a lot of the inclusion criteria I used there, we just reused for EduAide. So main questions is, are there demographically similar control and treatment groups in the study? If it's a no, then we're not going to put it into our knowledge base. Are there prior knowledge controls on the study? Do we actually know do we know what the students knew coming into the study, right? Was there similar instruction between the control and treatment groups? Yes or no? And finally, were the same assessment measures for the control and treatment groups, were they using the same assessment measures? So if you hit all four of those, yes, then we consider that to be the holy grail of a paper for inclusion. One, we know, again, demographically similar control and treatments, prior knowledge controls, similar instruction so we can limit teacher effects, and then similar assessment measures so we can limit assessment effects, testing effects. So those are the kind of four inclusion criteria. From there, you build out a rubric based on that paper as related to evaluating an instructional material. So it would be simple questions like, does the lesson plan, for example, include spaced retrieval practice, or does it encourage mass practice? That might be one such question. There's different rubrics for different types of resource tagging. And then we grab a bunch of outputs from EduAide. When I say a bunch, at the start it was hundreds, but now we can scale that up and do many more. And then we essentially run that output through an automated grading using those rubrics. And then we try different prompt structures to get us closer to the rubric. And then you have that data set to do all kinds of interesting things with, say, fine tuning or something like this.
Okay. I have some follow-up questions here.
Yes.
Actually, a lot.
Okay.
Because as an engineer by training, I started immediately doing reverse engineering in my mind. So I want to understand the process. So, again, what amazes me is like how a lot of the ed products are emerged from personal experiences. Like I think yours is definitely a perfect case in which you started. Nothing comes from things has to come from somewhere, I would say. So I think for both of us, it comes from our training experiences, our personal interest, that your master thesis is about this open education in which you study to look at how can we evaluate a study, how can we evaluate a research paper. And if my understanding is correct, you based on your personal experience as a teacher, your research training, your study, and also your personal, let's say, research taste, right? Like it's of course everything is to end up being a personal expression. You think those 4 criteria are important to do the paper selection first. That could be correlated. The selected paper could be correlated good quality, actionable, pragmatic teaching methodology to start with. And then you will do different types of tagging to ensure that, for example, the demographics, the classroom, the context can all get tagged. And then those will be transferred into different scenarios and, of course, later on into a knowledge graph. So
Yes.
I would say first question everybody will be super interested is how much of this is manual and how much of this is like tool assisted or even eventually AI assisted. And the reason I ask for this is, for example, recently OpenClaw is super, super popular worldwide.
Yeah.
And I've seen different kinds of it's called auto research tools. I think that applies probably mostly to the engineering or science part of the research, in which like you no longer need to read your research paper, you no longer need to do literature synthesis, you no longer need to even design your experiment methods. Everything gonna just like it's purely iteration driven, and over 24 hours you have 10 papers ready. I'm like, wait, what is that? So I think people fell in love with this idea of automation. Even to the point of knowledge discovery and sense making. And that's very, very dangerous, in my own opinion. But on the other hand, I do understand, knowledge exploration, sometimes quantity drives the quality, right? If you have enough quantities, then you probably have a leap of your quality in the output of your research. So I think the automation and the manual one are both important. So, and in your experience, I think you definitely you have reached a certain level of success in generating those criteria. So I wonder how you conduct this research translation into practice in the first place. Did you do this manually in the beginning, and then you generate some prompts, you iterate those prompts, and you have AI do it, and do you still have AI do it now? Like how does this, okay, sorry, because I personally feel this is a lot of like personal exploration and muscle, like brain muscle involved, because that itself, it's a good experience. At least for me, I love doing those manually. So having I doing them, I mean, of course, it's effective in terms of scale, but it might lack. I will be missing those experience of actually using my taste and brain. Yeah. So I wonder what was like for you.
So again, we first launched in 2023. That was before the research use cases became quite compelling for AI. So at the beginning, everything was totally done by hand, just manual. Most of it is still manual. A lot of the paper selection is still manual. I use Research Rabbit, which is an interesting tool a bit. It helps uncovering some of the connections between citations and where the paper is cited later on. But I like doing research, right? I don't see the point of, say, automating away the research effort. I'm also very young in my career as a researcher that I hope to become more serious in doing that, right? As like my job in the future, researching and teaching. So the idea that as a novice researcher, for me to completely automate it is just a form of cognitive offloading. And how will I understand what good research looks like if I don't engage with it myself? Like I said, a lot of this came from my graduate studies, and I found that a lot of educational research was quite poorly controlled, still today quite poorly controlled. The number of studies that do not have demographically similar control and treatment groups is astounding. The number of studies that do not feature prior knowledge controls is astounding. The number of studies that do not have similar instruction between the control and treatment groups is astounding. And the number of studies that do not have the same assessment measures between the control and treatment groups is astounding. You would think that these are baseline controls that almost any piece of educational research, controlled study of educational research, should have. I get there's case studies and things like this, but if you are actually doing an intervention in a classroom and you're trying to empirically test whether or not that intervention is going to increase the likelihood that learning may take place in the classroom, you need to do a better job of controlling for outside influences. The number of teacher effects that bleed through in research studies, the amount of prior knowledge effects, just the number of confounding variables in general in educational instructional research is difficult to contend with, because most of the research will be applied research in the field, in a real classroom. In a real classroom, there are many interruptions and unique circumstances that will confound the generalizability of that study. Students being pulled out of class, attendance, for example, is just one piece. Again, in the school itself, students' prerequisite coursework, what they've done before they got into your course and things like this. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's tough to do good instructional research, and I hesitate to outsourcing the selection of papers to an AI to be able to effectively pick out papers that have those controls in place, or to understand that it has 3 out of 4 of the controls in place, and that's good enough, right? I'm trying to get a rough approximation. Fortunately, I'm not publishing a research paper on how EduAide goes about controlling it. It's all kind of an internal operation that I conduct, and I'm accountable to our customers. So, but if I'm like, okay, I like this meta-analysis, for example, or one of these systematic literature reviews that I think might be worth including, I can kind of go around my own selection criteria and include it, because I like the Dunlosky 2013 paper on effective research studies and effective learning methods, right? I want to use that paper, and I want to use the lessons from it specifically around avoiding keyword mnemonics or just base highlighting in student-facing materials or something like this. But I'm starting to ramble about my opinions on just educational research in general. So I'm going to stop now and we'll get back to the question.
No worries about it. I really appreciate your sharing. I think that's super authentic, and that's something I feel like will help a lot. And not just clarifying, but like many people think, oh, we struggle the same thing, right? Like because one thing about my thesis is it was 2 years ago, and generative AI was there, and I was doing I do something about education plus AI, the pedagogy and technological alignment. So initially I tried to build some products myself and make it part of my thesis. And what I found was like, it's really hard to explain why this feature going to this way. And then when I look back at the previous studies and even 10 or 20 years back, like mind mapping, for example, there was some super cool tool that aligns with all the learning science pedagogically. They were experimented, they prove it. Yeah, of course, it's small scale. But I never see them in classroom. That was what really surprised me. And it turned out that, okay, I was not able to do it because previously there's no literature to support why I will, design the AI feature in this way to prove that it's pedagogically sound. So instead, I did a tool analysis based on Magic School. So I was looking at how, Magic School design all these features. I have to manually mapping it back to my understanding as an engineer about those AI functionalities, stuff like that. And one thing what I noticed is, and I just want to echo your earlier saying that I think to do a research, right? Research is super controlled. It needs to be very quote unquote impeccable in terms of all the criteria needs to align versus, if you are an engineer or you are a pragmatist, like a teacher, for example, your environment is never the same. And in your job, just trying to figure out how you put things together, right? Like, it's like everywhere are the nails, like one hammer, but you have so many nails, you have to make things work.
Yeah.
Versus as a researcher, you have so many hammers, but you have only one hammer. So
Mhm.
so it's really hard to, but it's also so meaningful to bridge the researcher's mindset and the practitioner's mindset, which I think you're doing that so well, and that manifested in your product. And I do have one follow-up question, because many of the audiences are teachers. And sorry, one more context is,
Mhm.
I just love reading the research paper. Like I mentioned, like I found so many good products designed even decades ago that could now be recreated using generative AI, especially the coding agents. Um, so I personally feel like if I'm going to, for me, if I am going to convert research paper into practice, I want to build products,
Mhm.
not just learning sciences engine.
Yeah.
And and recently I open sourced a cloud skill that help people to trying to make sense of the research papers using the cognitive conflict, like the schema
Mhm.
theory, trying to cause and cognitive conflicts, mapping out the schema, and then do the reconstruction of the
Mhm.
schema. So to empower more people, you don't have to have master or doctoral training, but using the help of AI, that's trying to generate these conflicts and support or facilitate those reconstruction. So my question here is, what's your thought about having, for example, teachers or edtech entrepreneurs reading academic research paper on education?
Mhm.
Do you think it's
So,
something that we think everybody should be doing, or it should be, doing like smarter way or less, um, not saying lazier, but like offload or something like, because you build your product using tons of research paper, and that's tied to your personal experiences. And if I'm just thinking, but if we want to scale up this product design process, shall we have all those entrepreneurs, teachers, PMs start reading educational research paper? What is your take on
mm,
this?
okay. So a couple of things. One, I'd like to just clarify something from
Oh yeah,
before, right?
sure.
There's different levels of there's a hierarchy of educational research evidence, right? There's not just one thing we can point to and say, this is evidence of this method being effective, right? So you have the systematic review of randomized controlled studies and quasi experimental studies. You have non experimental studies. So this is observational research, which includes surveys and case studies. These might not be as tightly controlled and does not really manipulate variables, but it has its place, right? It is worthwhile to see a case study, to take surveys, to do observational research in the classroom. I mean, there's plenty of really good quasi experimental studies out there that I think can, to some degree, help guide a teacher to understanding what
Mm-hmm.
kinds of methods they may or may not employ in the classroom. But is it necessary for every practitioner to be immersed in the research and stay up to date? I'm not so sure about that. Here's why. Again, I think I underrate the quality of any given study. I don't put much stock in any
Mm-hmm.
one study. Um, you need replication. I need to see that this is still an effective method of instruction over many studies. For the average practitioner, I would suggest, just something like um, just a couple of books. Really, is all they need to get started. Um, for example, like Daniel Willingham's "Why Don't Students Like School?" If you're a practitioner and you give this a read, it's a cognitive scientist looking at how public education in the U.S. is structured and functions, and why this might what the implications are for the classroom. So, how the mind works and what it means in the classroom. Very effective. This great book here, How Learning Happens by Paul Kirschner and Carl Hendrick. It's part of a two-part series. The other one is How Teaching Happens. Both of these books each maybe highlights 20 studies. Each chapter is a different study that they introduce to the reader. That's 40 studies in a book. And I would say if you know those 40 studies and you've read this book, you have a baseline of practice. Maybe that and First Days of School by Henry Wong on classroom management. If you have the classroom management piece, you have a cognitive foundation, the rest of this will emerge in practice. You just need to approach the practice in good faith. If you have the baseline knowledge, it's going to, again, it's going to be pushed up against practice, and then you'll revise your practice in the face of student needs. But you have to have a baseline understanding. I'm not sure spending every morning with your cup of coffee combing through Google Scholar or Frontiers in Education or wherever you're getting your papers is the most effective thing for a teacher. When someone puts out a collection of studies, something like John Hattie's Visible Learning or something like this, it's worth paying attention to if it's making waves. But in general, the day-to-day minutia, not so important. Again, it's just you need a base foundation, and then from there in practice, that's where you'll get the most effective idea of what will and won't work. Outside of that, product designers, educational technologists definitely should stay abreast of the research. And I would argue that they should conduct their own observational studies, get into classrooms as much as they can. To me, that's where the things become really clear is in the classroom itself, in front of real students. And you do that over multiple years with multiple groups of students and you can get a sense of it. But again, is it necessary for a teacher to stay up on instructional research? It wouldn't hurt, I would say, right? It's not like staying aware of what's coming out in the field. It's not going to hurt your practice. But there's probably better ways to improve your practice at the same time.
I totally agree.
You can't do it from the point of view of as a novice. You need a baseline foundation of knowledge. I fear that teacher preparation programs don't do a good enough job in that regard, really sharing the cognitive basis of learning. I was surprised how little I knew of the cognitive basis of learning when I first got into teaching. And it was only when I started at Hopkins for my graduate degree that, that really became front and center. But the learning sciences themselves are in such disrepair currently. They need a lot of reform before I would say a teacher should be looking at these every day. But I wish there was a better, I might contradict myself now. I do wish there was a better pipeline for communicating the research. That's the biggest piece that's missing. It's not that the teacher needs to be reading the research, it's that the research needs to be communicated in a way where it can be readily applied to practice. And that's the biggest gap. The fact that it isn't is what's preventing me from saying, teachers, go out and read instructional research. Because very rarely do I see in papers clear practical implementation strategies or an idea of what this will look like in that teacher's classroom. And then how well does that study generalize from a math class to an English class to a social studies class to a different science classes, biology, chemistry, so on and so forth? That's more difficult to understand. Each subject you teach has its own methods that may be more effective for that subject. Again, you have the baseline cognitive functions. There are facts about how the brain consolidates and encodes, consolidates, and retrieves information. But at the same time, the best way to convey that information in, say, social studies is different than in a math class. In social studies, it might be reading a primary source, analyzing that primary source. In math, it might be repetition of a certain concept through practice, right? Retrieval practice or some form of deliberate practice therein. So different methods for different subjects. I would say it's tough for a teacher to identify which pieces of research out there apply to their subject, to what they're teaching. There were some great books that I picked up when I was teaching history, that were about, learning. I think it was Learning, Thinking About, and Teaching History. It was a book from 2001, so maybe slightly outdated. But the fact that it connected the cognitive science of learning to the subject-specific boundaries and things that we must consider, because each subject, each class that you teach has its own particular skill set, its own discipline, right? So how do you best convey the skills of that discipline, inculcate in students the knowledge, skills, and dispositions of that discipline? That will vary from discipline to discipline. So just saying go out and read Dunlosky's paper on effective learning methods may not be the most effective thing for that teacher to pick up on. So I threw out a lot of threads. Maybe some of it seemed contradictory and turned a bit into a rant, but those are
not
my
at all.
feelings about research to practice. I want to say teachers should read more research, but the problem is that the research rarely shows clear connections to practice. There needs to be more synergy between these things. Perhaps it's teachers in themselves being empowered as researchers and conducting their own studies, and then that being a community of practice. But there just needs to be a more robust scholarship of teaching and learning than there currently is.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's very insightful. I understand the actual implementation could be very, very challenging, but at least we need to start to talk about it. We need to have some awareness about it. And maybe sometime you will be either AI researchers or teachers, they figure something out, step by step, we can push this forward. And also I think it's a perfect timing to can look at EduAide product features itself. Because the product has so many different tools. It can generate different outputs to assist teachers for learning. And since you mentioned that teachers could have different disciplines and classroom situations that are different. So can you tell me something about the product itself? I think the first question I would have in mind after our conversation so far is are the product designed to be cognitive science agnostic to use it? Meaning I don't need to know much about cognitive science, learning sciences, but your product was designed in the way that, by scenarios, by subjects, I have already, for example, at least categorize it for the users. And then when the user come in, I will give you the output directly, but maybe more or less scaffolding it. So you, as a teacher, I was talking to this PBL instructional designer the other day, and one thing I find so amazing is she will spend equal amount of time writing down facilitation sheets for all the courses she has designed. It's basically how the teacher deliver the courses itself. So do you think if it's better if you share a screen and show the product and walk us step by step? We can pick on one specific learning science principle, whichever you prefer. And if you don't mind showing us, since I'm recording it, and I'll be asking questions because I think the podcast listeners cannot see the screen, but I will do a clip and show that on the video side of it. So maybe the research finding, the design decision, how you do the prompts engineering, other engineering, and output constraints, things like that. And let me know if you need access. I definitely.
Yes, if you could. To your first point, no, the teacher does not need to have a familiarity with the cognitive science of learning or the learning sciences more generally to be able to interact with the product. That's the idea. The idea is that we bring the pedagogical rigor or the pedagogy through our prompt, which the teacher really doesn't see or have to interact with. That's what each of these buttons here takes the place of. So if I was to select a debate, what you're really selecting here, or actually let's take worked examples as our case here. So I'll just type in worked example in our search, and as that's pulling up, I'll talk a little bit about it. So a teacher only needs to know the context in which they are working in. So what is my learning objective? What is the topic that I am teaching? What grade am I teaching? What are the needs in my classroom? What standards am I working with? Do I have curriculum documents already that I can attach here? Those are the kinds of questions the teacher's thinking about. They're deeply contextual questions, things that they know in and out. They don't need to have deep pedagogical knowledge beyond perhaps knowing that they want to use a worked example. What is the optimal means of structuring a worked example? Now, I used to ask this question, and people would look at me like I was crazy. They would say, what do you mean by what is the optimal worked example? And what I mean to say is, if what we are trying to do with any method of instruction is to create the conditions in which learning is most likely to take place, that would necessarily mean there is an optimal means of wielding that method or technique to do that, or else you wouldn't get those effects. So what are the elements, the essential elements of a worked example? Or what are the essential elements of retrieval practice? Why is it retrieval practice? Why is it not, say, mere recall? Or why is it not, why is it not something else? What is it to be a quality worked example? What are the necessary features? EduAide's prompt does all of that. It spells out the structure of the quality worked example. So let's select worked example, and I'll show you this. So this is the finalization form. This is where a teacher shares those details. What is my learning objective? What is the topic or main idea that I am teaching? Do I have any files I want to upload here? Is there a website that I want to use, a YouTube video, or specific academic standards? What's the reading level of the students I'm working with? And then there's AI model selection as well. But the main things that we want to know are those contextual details. We take
Which is
that
actually from the particular physical world that only teachers know. Yes,
exactly. It's from the teacher's specific context when they're using this platform. What classroom period are they planning for? What group of students? That kind of stuff. That comes together with the pedagogy, our structuring of the worked example. These two things come together and form a prompt. That prompt is then sent to one of our API providers, ChatGPT or Anthropic. We use both Claude and ChatGPT. We have them multi-models. We use various kinds. So that's kind of what EduAide is. It used to be used as a derogatory term, but I think that perfectly describes this. It's a prompt wrapper. It's a chat wrapper, right? But what is the optimal version of this prompt? How do I get the best possible worked example that I can get out of an AI? And that's where all of our testing, the knowledge graph, the fine tuning, the evaluator tools that we work with CZI on, our standards knowledge graph, that's where all of this comes into play. That's where all the quality assurance, that's why it's so important, because regardless of whether or not the teacher's prompting, whether we're prompting, whether it's some combination of the two, the primary bottleneck for the effective use of AI in education is verification and evaluation of the results. We need to ensure that what is being produced is not merely statistically relevant, but factually accurate, pedagogically rigorous, and can actually work in that classroom. So let's just create a worked example.
Yeah, I want to see your example.
Completing the square in quadratic expressions. Great. Again, I could attach relevant academic standards. We have all 50 states and jurisdictions and all of the relevant subjects. You can attach those as well, but we'll just work with a learning objective.
Yeah, while it's generating, I have a question, and you don't have to answer this if it's not appropriate, and I'm going to take it out, is that I 200% agree with you about the verification, evaluation, and pedagogically rigorous. And I think essentially what you did is, how can we ask a perfect question, like perfect quote unquote, to AI to get a good result and be able to ensure that the result is verified in line with all the standards we have. And my question, I want to focus on the prompt engineering part, the prompt optimization generation part. Is this dynamic? Or this is more like filling the blank thing? Because most of the prompt wrappers or GPT wrappers, it's like, if you look at the code, it's like they have placeholders, right? I collect XYZ from teachers, I put XYZ from the database using RAG, whatever, as my context. And it's then gonna form a super long comprehensive system prompts. And then you can use reasoning and stuff and then give you results. But my question is, this still looks pretty static, right? We're still depending on the prompts or the model itself give us good results. Have you thought of, or have you experimented, or maybe you're already doing this, is, at least in my mind, I feel the prompts generation should be dynamic in terms of maybe in between, before the final system prompts, there are certain decision-making steps. Like, I need to know, how do I know if the teacher provides good enough context? Some teacher will give you
Mhm.
super general ones because they don't know or they don't care, for example. And how do you know, like, even if this one's a worked example, right? But most teacher might never know worked example. I will just have a problem in my context I want to solve. And I don't know which directions or which categories of cognitive science or learning sciences I want to
Yeah,
integrate. So
great question.
yeah, so we will start from there. Then I think this AI engine needs to, there's some decisions at least
Yeah.
involved in this AI engine, and it's like it's dynamic. You have to pick, you have to probably do some evaluation in between. Yeah, so and that might be, the core of many
Yeah.
edX products. So if you don't want to answer this, I totally understand it, but I just
No,
want.
no, no. So what you are getting at involves many decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do, instead of trying to load all of those decisions into a dynamic interaction with the AI, we try to break those decisions apart into chunks, into
Mm-hmm.
sequences. So we do each one at a time.
It's
So
like a
let's start with your
workflow.
first piece. I don't know which instructional method to use, right? I don't even know that I need to use a worked example, right? How do I get there? Let me go all the way back to the beginning. This isn't merely a search engine here. We call this our recommendation engine for a reason. So if you were to type in just a learning objective, we parse that learning objective to pick out what is the instructional verb that you are using here. Will students examine something? Are they comprehending something? Are they understanding something, etc.? What is the goal of that? And then we have tagged all of our resources on EduAide along the taxonomy. We use Bloom's and Marzano's taxonomy of instructional verbs. So then we are able to pull out sequences of our tools that would align with that instructional intent and then match you with it. So maybe I don't know that I need a worked example, but I want to show students a step-by-step how to solve a problem step by step, right? I need to show students how to solve a problem step by step.
Yeah, that's way too generic, but that's a good start, right? That's how.
What I'm saying is, that's all the teacher has that problem, right? How do I structure this? It's generic, yes, but if you run the search,
this is realistic. Yeah,
it will have a worked example or some such thing. Example problem, worked example, and then we explain why. We give a rationale. Worked examples offer a structured method for students to follow along as they learn to solve problems, enhancing their understanding of the process. Or example problems provide a clear step-by-step approach to solving problems, making it ideal for demonstrating problem-solving techniques to students. So these rationales are dynamically generated based on what you put in, you're trying to accomplish, in the tool that we picked. So we'll pick a selection of 3 tools on EduAide that we think will help you solve that problem. If you have an example that is less generic, I'm happy to input that and we can test it.
No, this
here.
is good. This is good. This is exactly what I want. Yeah.
If we've also had teachers input things like common inputs we see here is something along the lines of, I am teaching an 8th grade US history course. They'll give me a whole description and narrative of the class that they are teaching, description of the grade level, what the subject is, what the learning objective is, what they did before, and then try to get a match. But that's the first piece, identifying the tool that you want to select. Now, we've seen other EdTech tools try to do this as the main workflow itself. You engage it, as you were getting at, as a dynamic interaction between you and the AI. What we found is that these, to your point, are quite generic. They still feel like very simple. The teacher inputs this problem. One such system that we saw doing this, the teacher would input their problem that they would have. It would say, great, first we need to create a lesson plan and a learning objective. And then it would take the lesson plan and learning objective based on the teacher problem and then create the materials from the lesson plan. That to me feels like it's a very scripted route. It would always do that, right? You don't want to start there. So here we just we have our 110 resources. We're working with what's been developed up to this point. And then we have the teacher intent, and we try to map the resource to the intent. Step 1. Then the next piece, this part is static, right? The worked example itself is the worked example behind the scenes that we've described, the context of what the structure should be, the structural formatting requirements, boundary conditions, things that we should avoid and whatnot. We don't, like for a prompting schema, we don't do the persona, you are an instructional design. That's a waste of tokens. That's just a waste of context. It actually adds nothing really whatsoever. We get straight to the description of the context of the feature itself. What is the tool? What is a worked example? What is the structure of a worked example? What are the optimal things to include in the worked example? Now, to that point, I will show you. So let's say a teacher has just a few basic topic ideas. Let me think of something here. Would you like to give me an example to use? Something very generic for a math class.
Math class?
Yes. I'll just include an academic standard. That might be easier. So we'll go to Maryland, where I teach. We'll go to mathematics. We'll go to 7th grade. Standards for math content, grade 7, expressions and equations, use properties of operations to generate equivalent expressions. We could do that. Sure, that works. So we'll apply properties of operations to add, subtract, factor, and expand linear expressions with rational coefficients. Let's say the teacher has linear expressions. They just type that in to their topic statement. That is generic and vague.
Yeah.
What about linear expressions? What are we doing with linear expressions? This is one crucial piece of large language models that I don't think people understand as well, is that it's a statistical engine that's doing a shallow computation over a vast amount of data. If you put linear expressions in as the input phrase, it's kind of like a garbage in, garbage out type of thing. If you are not precise, explicit, simple in your prompting, your description of what you're looking for, who knows where you're going to go. So we have this enhance button that will take those very simple descriptions and will translate them into learning objectives. So instead of linear expressions, now we have a learning objective that will constrain the AI. We will have students, let me get to the beginning of it. We will have students being able to simplify and solve linear equations using algebraic techniques, demonstrating their understanding by applying these skills to real-world problems. So we have a real-world problems scenario, we have a linear expressions topic, and we have a standard added. So the idea is that it's static, yes, but there are parts here that are quite active and dynamic based on what you input, right? Your topic, then, if you hit enhance, that's a separate prompt from the worked example prompt. We're now creating a quality learning objective. So there's a whole schema underneath that of what is a quality learning objective, which pieces should it include, what should it enable the teachers and students to do, right? It should be in student-friendly language. It should be something that you can share to the students to direct action. And then you have the standards attachment as well. So all of these pieces come together. So now we've had, in the course of making one resource, we've already had 3 interactions with an LLM. We've shared our classroom context and got a resource recommendation. We shared a few topic sentences and got a learning objective. We were able to attach relevant standards to serve as contextual information, and we select a reading level and a model, and then we generate. So it's not, it's a static process, sure, but I don't want to undersell it as just that. There's a few steps that go into it that are kind of hidden in the UI, so to speak. The search on your dashboard is not just a static search, just a messy search. It's actually a prompt to an LLM that is querying our database to pull relevant tools and generate explanations as to why that would be an appropriate method to use. Because if a teacher's not learning why they're doing what they're doing alongside the tool, I'm not sure the tool was so useful. So now, if you look at this worked example here, it's not just step 1, explain, step 2, write something on the board, then explain, then step 3, explain this, right? We have the explanation, but then we move into additional pieces that are usually effective to include. Student self-explanation prompts. So why is the distributive property used first in this equation? So now we're explaining our thinking along the steps. We include fading guidance, so you have a partially worked example to use after the initial worked example. We identify common errors, but then we have feedback mechanisms, connections to prior knowledge. We have notes for the teacher. It's not just the resource you will use with your students. This isn't what you would send to your students yet, right? The teacher would use this as a reference material for teaching class. So it's not just outputting instructional resources that you print and put in front of your student or post on your learning management system. It could be used as a script. It could be used as a scaffold for the teacher themselves.
Yeah.
And then the next piece worth highlighting is that the output here is not in a chat interface, as you can see. The output is in a document, in an artifact. So every output immediately goes to an artifact. And then you have this toolbar on the left-hand side that allows you to use an AI to manipulate this artifact. So this is where you can evaluate the material. We actually have an evaluation tool using CZI's grade level appropriateness evaluator. So now we're going to get a sense of the level at which a student could access this material independently, the grade level at which they could access it with certain scaffolds. We can get a recommendation of which scaffolds to use. We explain how we arrived at this method, and then you can create the revised versions from there. So we have evaluation tools inside. There is an AI agent that reads the document and can edit the document. So it's not just a static process.
Right.
Now the output itself is something that you can act upon, as opposed to just getting it in chat, copying it, pasting it into Google Docs, and that's
totally,
traditionally how most teachers are interacting. Nowadays, Claude or GPT could write it in a docx and can export it in something like this. But yeah, that's I went on for quite too long, probably. So happy to answer any questions that have come up.
No, this is great. And also I saw this artifact that immediately got my attention, because this is where you give teacher also the agency, right? Like this human in the loop. The teacher, I can quote self-determination theory, where the teachers feel like, yes, true, AI gave me something to start with, but I can still have the monitor and lead the entire direction, and I'll feel I'm being assisted. Like, for example, all the evaluation tools that you have given, like be able to edit it like in a way that I'm used to, like a Google Doc, is super powerful. And I think the way that this file has been generated is, I'm 200% sure you and your team has done a lot of, like you mentioned, like it was a chunking prompts, right? But there's so many thoughts that go into this. It's not like a random chunking or just arbitrary chunking, because you also list out, like, I feel like the entire output is like it's a very cognitive and granular level of facilitation. Like using word like how the tool can now scaffolding the teachers to do better at teaching. The contents, of course, if you look at the bytes of it, information of it, that's what GPT is most good at. I mean, AI is very good at it because it's all codified knowledge. But the actual instructional delivery, the course delivery, the presence the teachers created, this is outside AI, outside GPT.
Yes.
And how can we empower people to do that? I think, first of all, we gave them what they need, and then they can use their own creativity to do that. And I think this is a great example. So I want to learn more about the rubric system, because previously you mentioned using rubrics to grade outputs and adjust the system. Do you mind sharing, for example, what are the actual dimensions you measure? A couple of things we've heard from many researchers and then some product reviews is like dimensions could include, for example, cognitive demand, like DOK levels, factual accuracy. Of course, you have to be factually accurate. This is like no doubt. Or like age appropriateness and bias detection.
Yeah.
Like, how do you design your rubrics and how do you automate this, if you automate at all?
So the rubrics themselves are simple, right? They are yes or no questions more often than not. Do we meet the following criteria? Yes or no. And then you have your input. So that would be, well, perhaps what you just saw there, right? Expressions. And then we would have the output, and let's say it's the worked example. input, output. Then we have the 4 criteria for the rubric, yes or no, right? So then we have all of this, do it over. You would run, the base procedure is you would run the same prompt 3 times because I want to account for fluctuations in the evaluation itself. So then I have 3 runs with the same. Then I have it for each grade. So now I need to scale up from 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. I want to run each grade and prompt combination probably 10 times. So that's 3 runs for 10 different prompts per tool. So in total, you're getting 3 runs, 10, you're getting 30 outputs for a particular resource itself. And that would be for each grade level. So I would run a worked example 10 different ways. So I would have 10 different subjects. Factoring polynomials, linear equations, et cetera, et cetera. I have 10 different topics. I run each of those topics 3 times. So I have 3 variations. I grade each of those outputs against the rubric. There should only be 6 at most criteria that are yes or no. Does the worked example feature step-by-step guidance? Something as simple as that. Yes. Does the work example feature student self-explanation prompts? Yes or no. Does the worked example feature a partially worked example follow-up problem with extension activities? Yes or no. And then we check these prompts to see over the course of the 10 different variations of prompting we tried here, which of these most reliably creates those conditions. If none of them do, or if we find a more promising lead, then we'll double down on that lead and we'll run that many more times and grade it against the rubric itself. And then from there, you start to fine tune your prompt.
Yeah, I see. So this is so interesting because that means like whenever this teacher says, seeing as you have demoed it, all these evaluations and rubrics are already completed and passed before the teachers see the final outputs.
Yes, it's all of our quality assurance testing behind the scenes before it gets to the educator. Then the educator has some simple tooling, the CZI evaluator tools, to just kind of double check on their end, the little transparency mechanisms, so that when we say the generation is at a 6th grade reading level, we can actually mean that. So there's 2 levels of evals that we do. You have your pedagogical piece, which is, does this resource, does this asset have the following elements? Yes or no? That's the first pass. And then the second pass is through the CZI grade level appropriateness. So we look at text complexity, we look at a sentence structure, we look at prior knowledge constraints. So then we begin to form this package. So 1, we have the layout and format of the asset itself. Does that worked example adhere to, I don't want to say adhere to principles, but does the worked example represent the optimally structured worked example for what you're trying to do?
I see.
Then is that worked example appropriately worded for that grade level that you're going to teach? Does the teacher understand what the prior knowledge constraints are? And then if the resource passes all of these bars, then it will be something that we use on EduAide.
That's really cool. I have one follow-up question about this.
Yeah.
Is because you have close to 1 million, like over 800,000 teachers using EduAide. I mean, across the country, going to be a lot of schools, which is like super amazing. So what do you notice? Like, what if, there's some users, it could be power users and just like teachers give it a try. Given all these like features and functionalities you have, what do power users, teachers do differently, or, particular features that they find amazing and helpful?
Okay, so what we define as a power user is someone who has multiple sessions, creates multiple resources in that session. But the one user that's most interesting to us is the one who makes the most use of the text editor controls, all of those generations. Are we differentiating the content to go back to, oh, I'm sorry. I just realized I was not sharing my screen that whole time.
Oh, no worries.
Oops. Let me come back to this. So one thing we're looking for is, what is the source of the interaction? Is the teacher generating their content from here? at the dashboard, or are they generating content from here in this dialogue? That's a crucial distinction, because if we're doing it from here, we have our work example. What might come after that? Student practice, perhaps. We'll go with a short answer worksheet. Then we can apply this current document as context. That's the interesting piece, when the documents start to link from one another, and then the assets have a scope and sequence. So now we'll create a new document. We'll use our past work example as our context. We still have the same objectives, still have the same topic, still have the same standard. We'll generate that. And then we see our power users begin to connect multiple resources and chain them together. That's the type of interaction that is the most valuable. Now, as for what are users most often doing, like what are patterns that we've noticed on EduAide, because that's a fun question. We find by far the most popular types of tools on EduAide, for better or for worse, are the instructional games that we offer. I will say we try to go to great lengths in how we design these games. We don't want them to be like your play a game, stop and answer a question, then play a game. That's just like surface engagement with a review question, then surface level engagement, then review question. And it's not really you want to design a game such that the win state of the game itself demonstrates mastery of the objective that you are teaching towards. So we could do a better job of that on EduAide, I'll be honest. But say just some really simple classroom review games. Most of this is test prep type review that we see folks using it for. A lot of SAT test prep, for example. You'll have those questions embedded into different game-based scenarios. Yeah, I want to do a better job on our game-based. That's the biggest area for improvement in my book. I think Dr. Jim Diamond, my advisor at Hopkins, he would certainly agree there.
He was one of our panelists before. Just FYI.
Wonderful. Yeah. He's really opened my eyes to the possibilities for game-based learning environments and game-based assessment, but also many of the drawbacks of how most of those environments are designed today. But that's by far the most popular set of tools on the site. Which I think makes sense for the first affordance of AI, which is you can create an arbitrary number of review questions, right? You could it does that part very well and with minimal guidance, as long as the distractors are of quality and the prompts are actually aligned to the objective that you're assessing with the questions. But in general, I understand why teachers want to use an AI to generate scores and scores of review questions for assessments.
Cool. Thank you so much. And one last question before we're wrapping up. I do want to touch upon the business model side of it, because essentially we're a company, and then many entrepreneurs actually listen to this podcast. And after seeing these amazing demos and these wonderful conversations, they'll be wondering, how do you survive all these ever changes? Because we couldn't ignore that there are some like super big players in this field. For example, Magic School. And you are bootstrapped, you never raised VC money. And then that's amazing. And people are very curious about smarting, even like one person company, this kind of new paradigm coming up. So I wonder how you think about your business strategies. For example, you are dramatically cheaper than Magic School. You have $6 versus $13. And
we have a dramatically lower overhead than Magic School, and our margins don't have to be as fat as Magic School, so that enables us to offer our product at a much lower price.
Yeah, and many competitors chase districts, which has become like a 2B or 2G selling strategy directly, but you started with individual teachers. So I feel like I want to reframe the question to make it.
Well, we sell to districts as well. The selling to teachers is the strategy to sell to districts. As a bootstrapped company, we needed a solid monthly recurring revenue in order to pursue larger district contracts, because we're going to burn money month to month on marketing and whatnot. Of course, we hire far fewer marketing and sales reps and account executives because we're a bootstrap team of 3. But the point is, we needed solid monthly recurring revenue in order to pursue those districts. So you have your subscription model, $5.99 a month, $49.99 a year. That's the base. That is the revenue that you can then use to keep EduAide running as you pursue your district contracts. And then it also helps with word of mouth, because then we can pull a report and see that there's a lot of folks, say with a particular email domain, right? They're working in a particular school. Then we can reach out to that school and say, hey, you have 125 teachers that are using EduAide. We would love to offer more in-depth professional development and support services and onboarding and implementation support. And that's really how you then begin the district deals for us. So it's a two-pronged strategy where the direct-to-teacher is the base model that enables EduAide to operate month to month. Then that enables us to pursue the districts, and districts have a prolonged sales cycle. So that's really the distribution channel. You get a direct-to-teacher, open up a district, and then if you show outcomes and show efficacy, and then you're kind of in the district budget at that point, so long as you remain an effective tool for teachers.
Yeah, I think many people will think about, oh, what I should do this, should I do X, Y, Z? But I feel like you are very conscious about what you do not want to do and what you didn't do. So what do you think that is one thing that you didn't do? It turned out that was a very good decision.
Didn't do that was a good decision. That remains to be seen. It's, we're still doing this. So I'm not sure I can say for sure that any decision was a good decision just yet, right? It's we shall see if the decisions we have made are good decisions. It's the method. I think you could just say it's crossing the river by feeling the stones. You're getting a sense of where you're going, and you're letting the way kind of determine that. We don't want to have this set strategy, because one of the nice things about being a smaller company is that we're incredibly lean and agile. We can direct our attention to different things at our will. So we have a lot of optionality, which is a merit. Now, being a bootstrap company has its drawbacks for sure. I mean, yeah, I'll state that there's trade-offs on both sides. So I'm not sure I can say that any decision was one that we're particularly happy with. My initial gut instinct was to say not doing student-facing tooling, because I do not believe that they are the evidence base isn't really there yet to determine whether or not interacting with an AI tutor has solid positive impacts on student learning outcomes. I've seen some studies where you have your two study groups, one with an AI tutor, one using traditional study means. On the initial tests, the students using AI tutors tend to perform better than the students who were using traditional study methods. But then on follow-on studies afterwards, the students who use traditional methods tend to outperform those who use the AI tutors. So there's this kind of drag where the memory traces are not as durable in the AI groups as they seem to be in traditional study groups. And then also just some of the studies we've seen on like student interactions, the quality of interaction with AI tutors. We've seen quite a few where it's very few interactions or very shallow interactions, right? Students just saying IEK in answer responses and then spamming that multiple times until inevitably they get the answer from the AI tutor. So we didn't go that route. We wanted to have the teacher mediate the content that is being delivered to students, because we still feel like that for novice learners, especially, interactions with AI as the facilitator of instruction or of practice is likely not the most optimal facilitator. It still seems to be that the human is better, at least in our approximation. So that's a bet that we took. I'm not sure if that is a good decision, right? So I could be wrong, right? Perhaps these models get significantly better at working with students. I don't think they will, but perhaps that they do, then that was a bad decision. So I am hesitant to answer your question on what has been a good or bad decision.
I don't think there's any good bad decision. Because
there are objectively bad decisions. There
really?
are poor outcomes, right? You can make a decision in which case the whole thing goes up. I get that, but in terms of good itself, there are justifiable conclusions you can reach that, okay, I think this decision was positive, but long run implications, I can't guarantee.
Cool. We're running out of time, but I have tons of questions I haven't asked yet, and I really want to ask. But thank you so much, Thomas, for your time. I really appreciate it, and I couldn't wait to get it edited and released. I believe that A lot of the listeners' audience will be super interested. Maybe, when time allows, I want to invite you to come back again. I have seen the version 2 of it. Today you showed me the version 3 of it. Maybe when you launch your version 4, I would love to talk with you more about this whole journey.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you so much for the invite. It was a pleasure to chat. Happy to talk again. If any of the listeners just have follow-up questions or want to learn more, at our contact page on EduAide, you can send us an email. I'd be happy to get back to you if you have any additional questions.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. You have a good day. Thank you so much for your time.
You as well.
Bye.
Bye.